Chapter 1. I was reborn on the day my father brought his illegitimate son, Edward, into our home. In the living room, my mother was wiping her tears, her voice filled with indignation. "Richard, you've gone too far. You have an illegitimate son as old as Oscar, and now you want to bring him into the company. Why should Oscar have to compete fairly with him? The company should rightfully belong to Oscar." My brother Oscar stood to the side, looking indifferent. My mother nudged me, signaling with her eyes for me to join her side. Seeing this familiar scene, I finally confirmed that I had been reborn. In my previous life, my father, Richard, brought his illegitimate son, Edward, into our home, demanding that both he and my brother start from the bottom of the company and compete fairly. Only the capable one would inherit the company. Knowing my brother's indifferent nature, my mother and I threw a fit, forcing my father to abandon this idea. Later, with my help, Oscar smoothly inherited the company, but after he took over, he was constantly troubled. He blamed me, saying that the burden on his shoulders was too heavy because of me. Did I ever want to be the chairman? I'm so tired and fed up with being the chairman. Every time he said these words, I felt guilty and worked tirelessly for him. Later, Oscar's girlfriend left him because he didn't have time for her, and she married someone else. Oscar went mad with resentment, blaming everything on me, and ran me over with his car. My body was crushed repeatedly, the excruciating pain enveloping me. It wasn't until my soul floated above that I realized Oscar had always deeply resented me for pushing him into the chairman's position, taking away his freedom. My clenched fist made a cracking sound. "Well then, this time, I'll do as you wish." Ignoring my mother's pleading eyes, I said, "Mom, wealth doesn't last beyond 3 generations. I think Dad is absolutely right. The position of chairman should go to the most capable person." Chapter 2. My mother was stunned. All my life, she had taught me to unconditionally stand by her and my brother. She often said, "You, your brother, and I are the closest. No matter what happens, you must stand by your mother and brother." In my previous life, it wasn't until after my death that I realized I was just a pawn. When my mother saw my body, her first thought was to fabricate a story that I had taken my own life. In court, she testified that I had lain on the road and was run over by my brother unknowingly. Oscar is also a victim. He's been scared out of his wits by his sister's body these past few days. My daughter always hated her brother. She must have framed him. She painted me as a cheerful but inwardly twisted person, deceiving everyone. In the end, Oscar was declared innocent. Back home, she hugged Oscar, shedding a few tears, and spat at my ashes. "That wretched girl, even in death she harms my Oscar." But Oscar didn't appreciate it at all, merely pouting and saying, "Mom, you and my sister are too competitive. This won't end well." I don't know if my mother met a bad end in my previous life, but in this life, I guarantee she won't have a good end. I smirked and continued to say things that would hurt my mother. "Mom, I know you've always wanted me to help Oscar, but the company is Dad's hard-earned empire. If it falls into the wrong hands, it will be ruined. Oscar, don't you think I'm right?" Oscar couldn't hide his smugness and pouted. "Mom, you shouldn't be so competitive. I never wanted to be the chairman. All I want is to live a life of luxury and leisure." Chapter 3. In my previous life, Oscar also claimed he wanted a life of luxury and leisure. But in reality, he had always seen the chairman's position as his own. He just wanted others to beg him to take the position, to satisfy his image of being indifferent. My mother looked even more upset. But what did that have to do with me? In the end, my father made the final decision. Oscar's idea is good. The company's affairs should indeed be handled by the capable. After my father left, my mother grabbed me, her nails almost piercing my skin. "Patricia, are you really my daughter? How could you side with an outsider?" I broke free from her grip. "Mom, didn't you hear Oscar? He just wants to live a life of luxury and leisure. Being the chairman is so tiring. Oscar, tell Mom. I have work to do and need to go on a business trip. I'm leaving." Oscar maintained his indifferent facade. "Mom, you shouldn't be so competitive. It won't end well. One must be content and keep to their place." My mother frantically cited examples of illegitimate children inheriting fortunes in wealthy families. But Oscar dismissed them all. Those people are not content and have poor character. I don't care about the chairman's position. I sneered inwardly. Let's see if my indifferent brother and my brainless mother can achieve his dream of a life of luxury and leisure in this life. Chapter 4. I wasn't lying to my mother. I did have a business trip, but it was tomorrow, not today. I arrived early at the partner company to start understanding the work. With the memories of my previous life and my preparations in this life, my work went surprisingly smoothly, far better than in my previous life. My boss was thrilled and called to praise me. Patricia, you finally focused on your work. I've always known you had potential, but your mind was never on your work. If you keep this attitude, I promise to give you more opportunities. In my previous life, I was brainwashed by my mother to prioritize Oscar, neglecting my job, so much so that my boss disliked me until my death. In this life, I must live for myself. But Oscar wasn't so lucky. After work, my mother called me 49 times in a row. My intuition told me something had happened to Oscar. In my previous life, whenever something happened to Oscar, my mother would call me frantically, brainwashing me to spend money and effort on him. In this life, I wouldn't be foolish enough to listen to her and be Oscar's scapegoat. Patricia, you don't know how everyone at the company is targeting your brother. They give him all the dirty and tiring work. Your brother is a golden boy. How can he endure such grievances? My mother's anxious voice brought me immense satisfaction. From her fragmented words, I pieced together the whole incident. After Oscar joined the company, the leaders didn't go easy on him because he was the chairman's son. Instead, they put pressure on him. Thinking deeper, without my father's approval, which leader would risk offending the chairman's son? But Oscar, with his high self-esteem, acted like the chairman's son, strutting around the company, clocking in and out without listening to the leaders or doing any work. When colleagues invited him to dinner, he pouted and refused, privately telling my mother that these people had poor character and only got where they were by pleasing others at the dinner table. Naturally, Oscar was targeted in the company. Listening to my mother's rambling, I pretended to be concerned. What should we do then? I really want to help Oscar, but he said, I'm too competitive and it's unlucky. What if I bring bad luck to him? My mother exploded. You ungrateful wretch, I raised you for nothing. You won't even help your brother. You have poor character. My son is the future chairman. Her tone was no different from that of a scholar's mother. I laughed. Mom, this is just the beginning. The road ahead is long. Chapter 5. My mother completely resented me. After that, she never called me again. I was happy to be free and finally buried myself in my work. It's funny, my father's company, which he considered leaving to my brother or his illegitimate son, never thought of me. In my previous life, I foolishly worked for the company under my brother's name. In this life, as I thrived in my own field, my father instead asked me to join the family business. Patricia, you're very capable. You should come to the family business. Working for those small companies is a waste of your talent. My father said cheerfully. This was part of my plan, so I agreed. In my previous life, until my death, my father never let me join the family business. I always worked under my brother's name. My mother eagerly nodded. Yes, Patricia, if you join the company, you can help your brother. If you had joined the company earlier, would your brother have been harmed? You're such an ungrateful wretch. Your father says one word, and you join the company. I called you so many times and you ignored me. Oscar interrupted my mother, pouting. Sis, you wouldn't be trying to use that small company to get into the family business, would you? As a woman, how can you do such a disgraceful thing? I laughed. Joining my own family's company is disgraceful? I'm doing it for your sake. I want to bring glory to the family. I can't watch you and the illegitimate son fight to the death while I stay outside. Bringing glory to the family doesn't mean. Enough. Can you learn from your sister? If you weren't so useless in the company, would I have asked your sister to join? My father slammed the table, pointing at Oscar and scolding him. My mother, like a mother hen, shielded Oscar and argued with my father. The only difference was, I would never join my mother's side again. If this is what my mother wants, then this is just the beginning. Chapter 6. When I joined the company, I didn't choose my brother's easy job or the illegitimate son's extremely demanding job. Instead, I chose a moderately challenging role. I worked diligently every day, not acting superior as the chairman's daughter, but blending in with the company staff. Soon, I built strong friendships with my colleagues, who helped me a lot in my work. I was having a great time. Thinking back to my previous life, to help my brother establish himself in the company, I worked hard to build good relationships with his colleagues, hoping they would help him more. But to Oscar, it was proof of my poor character. I thought you wouldn't do such things even if you knew about them, but you did, proving your poor character. I saw you talking to my colleague. Do you like him? Even if you want to help me, seducing men isn't the only way. As I reflected on the differences between my two lives, I saw my mother's social media post showing off a gift from Oscar. My son is so thoughtful. Only my precious boy gave me a gift for Mother's Day. The picture was of a $9.99 rose bracelet from an online store. In my previous life, I always put a lot of thought into buying gifts for her on Mother's Day or her birthday, catering to her preferences. But she never appreciated it, thinking my gifts overshadowed Oscar's. Oscar always gave cheap trinkets, but he would say, "My bond with Mom isn't about the value of the gift. It's the thought that counts." But you, giving such flashy gifts, make Mom feel like an outsider. How hurtful. In short, no matter what I did compared to my indifferent brother, I was always scheming. And my mother, claiming not to favor sons over daughters, had long tilted the scales towards Oscar. In this life, I ignored my mother's sarcasm. After all, the real show was about to begin. Chapter 7. A month later, the long silent Edward led a team to develop a chip. This marked the end of the company's inability to produce chips. The arrival of the chip also broke the monopoly of a rival company, bringing in millions in revenue. At the annual company party, my father, drunk, boasted about Edward. "Edward truly has my spirit. He spent 3 months developing the chip. When I pass on, I'll be at ease leaving the company in your hands." He spoke without intention, but my mother took it to heart. She immediately went on high alert, rushing to my father. "Richard, I've been with you all these years, and now you want to give the company to an illegitimate son. Oscar is much better than this illegitimate son. Have you no shame?" Even in his drunken state, my father's dignity as the chairman surfaced. "Oscar? He can't even handle basic tasks. Why should he inherit my company? What have you turned Oscar into over the years?" I quickly stepped in to pull my mother away. "Mom, Oscar has already admitted he's not as capable. When Edward inherits the company, Oscar can finally live a life of luxury and leisure. Isn't that great? Congratulations, Dad, on finding your ideal successor." Oscar couldn't stay silent any longer. He pulled me aside, half persuading, half threatening in a voice only we could hear. "Sis, I'm your real brother. If Edward becomes chairman, it won't end well for you. You have to help me become chairman." I laughed. "But you said you were tired of the scheming and fighting at work. Besides, Edward is also Dad's son, our brother. He's not an outsider. Both of you are my brothers. It doesn't matter who becomes chairman, right?" He was completely at a loss for words. In my previous life, whenever Dad praised Edward, I would work overtime, using Oscar's name to achieve better results. Oscar thrived on my efforts, surpassing Edward and earning Dad's favor. But he always blamed me. "Sis, you shouldn't do this. Edward is also Dad's son. You'll hurt his self-esteem." Now, looking at my brother's frustrated face, I felt immense satisfaction. This is just the beginning. I'm merely repeating your words from the previous life. Can't you handle it? Chapter 8. Since the annual party where my father praised Edward, his promotion was unstoppable. My indifferent brother could no longer sit still. He uncharacteristically asked for my help in the company. "Sis, at this rate, Dad will definitely give the company to Edward. We won't have a good life then. You have to help me become chairman. Once I am, I'll do whatever you say." Oscar's promises were grand and effortless. If I hadn't experienced the previous life, I might have believed him. I smirked. "Brother, I want to help you too. But you're never in the company. How can I say those achievements are yours?" It's laughable. In this intense competition, My brother was deeply in love with his girlfriend Olivia. Every day, they played out a romantic drama. In my previous life, I approached Olivia, giving her a large sum of money to stay away from my brother. She was only after money, so she announced their breakup immediately after receiving it. But unexpectedly, Olivia had a car accident, lost her memory, and fell in love with someone else. After becoming chairman, Oscar, heartbroken, blamed everything on me. In this life, I approached Olivia again, gave her a large sum of money, but asked her to cling to my brother. Now, Oscar was so immersed in love that he wouldn't listen to my advice. "That's impossible. You're just jealous of my relationship with Olivia. You don't want to help me." Seeing him take the bait, I continued, "Actually, I have a way to make Dad believe in your abilities and let you be with Olivia." Chapter 9. It turns out Oscar's indifference was just a facade. Without it, he was a fool. When I suggested taking over his work under his name, he agreed immediately after a second's thought. "Sis, I knew you were my good sister." Then he changed his tone. "But I still advise you not to be too ambitious. As a woman, your main role is to support your husband and raise children. See, give him a little sweetness, and he immediately takes advantage. Keep pretending. Soon you won't be able to." Chapter 10. I officially took over all of Oscar's work. With 2 jobs combined, I was back to the hectic days of my previous life. But this time, it was different, because all this would be mine in the future. My efforts paid off. Seeing my and Oscar's performance, my father smiled at me. "Patricia, you're very capable." My mother, applying her skincare, grumbled, "Not as good as Oscar." I say Oscar is the smartest in our family. All right, Oscar is the best." My family temporarily returned to its usual peace, with my parents pleased with Oscar's progress. But in reality, Oscar was still lost in Olivia's love. I wondered how he would react when he found out his fiancée was taken. Chapter 11. Oscar had a fiancée, a match made by my father when he was 5. Men always want what they can't have. My father was like that, and so was Oscar. After falling in love with Olivia, Oscar wanted to break off his engagement with his fiancée, Michelle. In my previous life, I took great risks to negotiate with Michelle, finally stabilizing Oscar's engagement. This allowed Oscar to surpass Edward and become my father's chosen successor. But now, without my help, Edward and Michelle were together. When the detective handed me the photos, I immediately showed them to my father. With my mother and brother present, I added fuel to the fire. Seeing my father's expression change, I pretended to be concerned. "Dad, whether Michelle marries Edward or Oscar, she's marrying into our family, but Oscar is an illegitimate son. How could he lead a team to develop a chip? Did Michelle help him? What are her intentions?" In my previous life, I discovered too late that Edward approached Michelle for her family's chip technology. He, like Oscar, leached off Michelle, earning my father's favor step by step. But in the end, I found out. In this life, I warned Michelle countless times, but she was still a hopeless romantic, so I had to break them up. Returning to the present, my mother was also cursing Edward's ill intentions. "Oscar, as always, acted high and mighty. Such poor character." I echoed, "Dad, Edward is an illegitimate son. Raised outside, he might harbor resentment towards us. Could he and Michelle be plotting against us?" My father said nothing, but his face showed a hint of panic. That was enough. He might not listen to my mother or brother, thinking they were after the family business, but my previous impartial stance made him trust me. Plus, as a daughter, I couldn't inherit the family business, so he had no reason to doubt me. I sent my mother and brother away and told my father all about Oscar and Olivia's love story. Already reeling from the blow of Edward, my father was further devastated by Oscar. He visibly aged. He was furious. "Two ungrateful brats. Can't they give me a moment's peace?" I comforted him while soothing his anger. "Dad, Oscar doesn't want the family business, and Edward wants it too much. What should we do? You must keep them under control." Chapter 12. Leaving the old house, I sent messages to both Edward and Oscar. Soon, the showdown I had been anticipating arrived. On New Year's Day, Michelle entered the house hand in hand with Edward, followed shortly by Oscar and Olivia. I found an excuse to send Olivia away. When Oscar saw Michelle with Edward, he exploded. "You shameless woman! How dare you cheat on me with my own brother? My father was planning to give the company to me, and he's just a pretender." My mother also joined in, adding fuel to the fire. "Daughter-in-law, you promised to marry my son only. And now, you can't resist an illegitimate son?" Edward, who had been enduring for the sake of the family business, finally lost his temper. Feeling emboldened by his relationship with Michelle, he believed inheriting the company was a sure thing. Without a word, he joined the fray with Oscar and my mother. The three of them fought and cursed each other. I exaggeratedly tried to break up the fight. "Stop fighting, all of you." When my father came to stop the chaos, he was furious. Olivia, perfectly timed, rushed out to confront Oscar. "What am I to you? Weren't we supposed to be together forever?" Oscar dropped his pretense completely. A man must prioritize his career. Business before family. Michelle has the entire Michelle family behind her. What do you have? After 2 lifetimes, Oscar's facade of indifference was finally torn away by himself. Olivia ran out crying. Oscar, ignoring Olivia, stubbornly complained to my father. "Dad, Edward stole my fiancée." Chapter 13. The situation ended with Edward being temporarily suspended from company duties. My father, still considering his relationship with my mother, didn't punish Oscar, but Oscar became more arrogant. He and Olivia became even more reckless, with Oscar even embezzling company funds to celebrate Olivia's birthday. My mother advised him to show his face more at the company, but Oscar was dismissive. "If I become chairman without Olivia's support, the future will be tough." I laughed. "In that case, let me take on the tough days for you." His behavior quickly drew the ire of his colleagues, but with Edward suspended, all their complaints fell on me. When I told Oscar about the dissatisfaction, he remained indifferent. "I seek love. How can these mundane people understand?" But he forgot. Water can carry a boat, but it can also overturn it. His good days were about to end. Chapter 14. On the day of the collaboration with the Michelle Family Company, we were all dressed to impress, except for Oscar. He was absent. My father waited and waited, but no one came. Lately, his health had been poor, and Oscar had been handling the company's affairs. But in reality, Oscar was busy playing romantic games with Olivia, leaving all the work to me. And I hadn't told him about today's event. In my previous life, when he found out I had paid Olivia to leave, he refused to attend this collaboration. My mother blamed me for being manipulative. In this life, I let things unfold as they wished. Where is Oscar? At my signal, the company leaders began to reveal Oscar's true behavior. My father was furious. "Why didn't you tell me? Are you in cahoots with them?" I pretended to be concerned. "Dad, I didn't want to upset you." Chapter 15. I signed the contract in place of my brother. Oscar somehow learned about my father's anger, but he felt no remorse. To him, love was above all else. Besides, wasn't I doing the work for him? But this time was different. My father, already ill, checked the company's accounts and found millions missing. After thorough questioning, he discovered Oscar had embezzled the funds. He was livid. In my previous life, when Oscar's embezzlement was discovered, I worked overtime to secure deals with small and medium-sized enterprises, restoring his standing with my father. But in this life, Oscar wasn't so lucky. Because my father was so enraged, he ended up in the ICU. Outside the hospital room, my mother cried her heart out. I offered her a suggestion. "Mom, Dad is angry because of Oscar. If he decides to bring Edward back into the company." Oscar approached, his face full of greed. "Mom, Patricia is right. We need to act first." This version of Oscar had none of his previous indifference. Chapter 16. I excused myself, citing work, leaving Oscar and my mother to care for my father. Edward, aiming for the company, rushed to the office upon hearing about my father's illness, demanding to resume work. But by now, I had established my authority in the company, and no one was willing to let him in. While I was winning at work, things were falling apart for my mother and brother. My father suddenly woke up and witnessed my mother and Oscar trying to drug him. "You wicked woman!" He immediately pressed charges against my mother and Oscar. Meanwhile, as he considered bringing Edward back, I and Michelle accused Edward of stealing company secrets, taking him to court. With no other choice, my father temporarily appointed me as his successor. After 2 lifetimes of effort, I finally received the treatment my brother had been born with. Chapter 17. Afterward, Edward was sentenced to 20 years for stealing company secrets. My mother and Oscar were sentenced to 5 years for attempted murder. On the day of the court's verdict, I dressed up and went to see Oscar. He was furious. "I am the chairman. You stole everything from me. Everything you have should be mine." I smirked. "Indeed, it should have been yours. But you didn't cherish it, so our father had no choice but to leave the chairman's position to me. Brother, let me tell you something. Olivia has married someone else after hearing about your attempted murder. Even in this life, you didn't end up with Olivia." Later, I heard that Oscar couldn't handle the shock of losing Olivia. After several escape attempts, he was sentenced to life imprisonment. My mother, unable to bear the stress, took her own life in prison. As for Edward, he tried countless times to reclaim the company, and my father almost relented. But I presented the paternity test, showing he wasn't my father's biological son. In my previous life, I used this evidence to help Oscar defeat Edward completely. Now the tables had turned, and I was finally the one who laughed last.